I'm not a folder guy. I don't care about like ultimate lock strength. That's just not one of my concerns. Like I'm not going to go around stabbing things and risking it failing and closing in on my hand. Like I care about it being strong, but I don't care about the maximum force that it could withstand. Some of the things that I care about are ergonomics. How easy is it to use? How does it feel and how does it sound? That kind of stuff matters to me a lot. I like kind of like modern hip knives. To me, that means one-handed operation, something that you can have like fun fidgeting with and like just closing over and over. But let's take a look at these. I haven't seen a lot of these. All right, let's see what's in this mystery bag of knives. That's not a folder. What the hell is this? What in the world? Oh, that's weird. That's mine. It's my first one. You probably have seen it. If not, it's the most recent video. That's a top secret project. Don't look at that. Another one of mine. Superlock. Oh, it's a tiny lockback. That's not a knife. First, I think I'll just run over all the different types of locks. First will be the one with not really a lock. This is a friction folder that I made in Nick Rossi's class. Friction folders are exactly what they sound like. It uses friction to open and close. Most of the friction folders that I've seen are just like a constant amount of friction throughout the entire deployment of the blade. And then you have a tab in the back where in the grip, it keeps it open. This one's interesting because the way that Nick taught how to build these, you can tune basically like the closed and open position. So there's no friction in the middle, and then it pinches it closed here, which is nice. So it acts almost like a detent. And then it pinches it back here for the open position, which is really nice. So this is a cool folder to me because I made it, and also it's an interesting take on your friction folder. It gives it a little bit more tactile feedback when you're using it. Like that little bit of detent action is cool. Next step up for me would be a slip joint where it has kind of like a spring detent action. I don't know what officially you'd call it, but it has, a lot of them have a half stop and then a full stop. And it's not quite a lock, it's just a very strong spring that kind of holds it in place. So for most use cases, like this is fairly secure, but if you press too hard on it, it will potentially close down on you. So that's just something you got to keep in mind. But for like most general purpose use for a folder, like that's to me a lot more confidence inspiring than a friction folder. And these are really popular because it's kind of like the classic like gentleman's knife. And one that's properly tuned and stuff is gonna have that really nice click. There's not gonna be a lot of like slop or anything like that, and has a good amount of force to open and close it. But just like the friction folder, to me this is a two-handed knife. Similar to a slip joint would be like a lockback. It's the same idea, but now there's a little bit of a tab in the back of that spring that actually holds it in place, and it clicks and it locks, and it won't close not no matter how much, but like it won't close for what it's intended for. So to actually close it, you have to press the spring back here and then close it. It's also a two-handed knife, just like the slip joint. These are really cool because I don't think I've seen any other folding knife use that kind of like lock design with the collar and stuff like that. So there's this collar that's kind of split in the middle, and you open it and you just twist it and it holds it in place. And these are super thin, and the design is pretty, I think, pretty iconic. Like a lot of people that don't know folders, they still know like an Opinel. You could lock it closed also, which is really nice because a lot of these other folders, you can't lock it closed. It's just locking it open. It's just kind of a really cool design, something that's like simple in idea. Like it's a piece of wood with a slot in it and then a collar that just kind of like, It's cool. Now we got all of the liner locks and frame locks. This is probably, I think, one of the most common, popular style of locks in the modern world of folding knives. This is like, to me, the gold standard of what a modern folding knife is. Like, it has a pretty smart locking system. It's got trade-offs, of course. Like, that's why there's all these new like locking styles and all that kind of stuff. But like, this is just such a good design to me. The nice thing about liner locks to me is like kind of the feedback of it. Like, I love the way these feel. Like, when one that's made like really well, it has a good detent. That's a nice, good, snappy detent. That's what I like about it. Like, if you just like gently close it, it has a clean click. And they're pretty strong, but there are drawbacks with this design. The main weakness with, I guess the couple different weaknesses of this design is they're not really ambidextrous. Like, because you have to put your finger and push this lock to the side, that means a lefty using it, you have to reach over with your other finger or thumb and then like pull it out of the way. It's really awkward. So like, generally these are made for right-handers or left-handers. But it's the same idea with all of these. They're liner locks. They have that piece of spring material that wedges up into that lock right there, or that lock face. Another drawback with liner locks is to close it, you have to put your finger in the path of where the blade's closing. So because you have to put your thumb in here and push the blade over, now you have to get your finger out of the way again and then close it. To me, it actually isn't that big of a deal because practicing it enough, like put my finger in there, close it, get the finger out of the way, and then it feels natural. But some people don't like that because they prefer having a lock where you don't put your finger in the path at all. So with a liner lock, we've got our pivot. Let's say our handle comes out like this. And then we've got a lock somewhere right there. The lock interface is going to be right at this point right here. That's where it engages the lock. And what happens is, from this pivot point out here, when you, let's roll a blade too. Plunge line. This is the blade, go in this direction, this is the handle. What happens if you put a closing force down in this direction right here, you're going to have a resulting force that is tangential to basically like this line versus the pivot. So like if you just extrapolate that right here, from here out here, you're going to get a force that is basically perpendicular to that line right there. And so this is imparting a force, a bending force upward into this long lock bar, and effectively it's going to want to bend the lock bar up and potentially bend it outward and buckle it. So that's kind of a drawback of like the liner lock as far as ultimate lock strength goes. With the frame lock, it's a little bit better because now you've got a much bigger, thicker lock bar, but it's the same concept. Like you've got that point of engagement and then the force going tangentially upward, and it's going to bend. It's going to actually push this lock bar up and potentially out. I mean, the question is like, how strong does a lock really need to be? I think that depends on the knife and what it's going to be used for. Pretty much all of these knives right here, I'd say they don't need like ultimate lock strength. Like these are all pretty much in your pocket, carry around, cut little things. You're not going to be going around in the woods like batoning firewood and stabbing whatever. So I don't know. I feel like there's a point of like diminishing return where if your liner lock is done properly and done well, it's going to work really well and it's going to hold up and you're never going to have a problem with it. It's when the lock isn't really properly designed. I mean, this might be an example of what I'm talking about, where the design doesn't really make sense to me. You've got your engagement point kind of further back behind the pivot, so you've got your force going up, and then there's all these little bends in it. And if you think about where that load is going, it's going way up, and because of the way this lock bar is designed, you don't have a straight path for the load to go. It's completely bending this bar straight up. And to me, that is a little sketchy. Like if I'm just pressing this lock bar, I feel it flexing. Like that's kind of scary to me. For a well-made, well-designed liner lock or frame lock, I feel like you're never going to run into a problem. This one's interesting though. Interesting, but now that I'm looking at it, the point of engagement for the lock is like way back here. Ooh, yeah. So I can disengage that lock just by hand. Yeah. And that's what I'm talking about. Like, there's no support. This lock bar comes out like this. Like, I don't know if you can see it. You can't see it in there. But there's no supporting structure back here. This bar is bending out like this. The point of engagement is all the way back here. So it's just pushing that bar kind of out of the way. Yeah, just by hand, I can close this knife. Let's talk about some of these newer, fun lock styles. Thank you to my patron, Clockwork Fish, for donating this one and this one for study purposes. Here's a button lock. I've been playing with this one for about a week, and it's been pretty interesting. Effectively, there's a pin right here that partially engages the blade when it's fully open, and then you just disengage that. And the nice thing about this is, to me, this feels like 90% ambidextrous. If I'm using it as a lefty, I'm able to close the blade with my left hand and still have a free index finger. So like, to me, that's important for comfort because I can close it like this, have a free finger, and I can still gently close the blade. Same thing on the right side. Free finger, close it like that. Ooh, I just chipped the nail. So that's really nice as far as like ambidexterity. And then as far as like strength goes, I think people could argue that this is stronger than a liner lock because you don't have a long bar that could potentially bend. You've got all of your force going up into this post right here. So that makes it pretty strong. You've got like, it's supported from both sides. A few things I like, a few things that I'm so-so on it. The nice thing about this is like, they could design a flipper tab that is way forward right here. Normally flipper tabs are kind of like in this general area, but this one they could push it way forward because there's no lock bar engagement face that has to be cut in right here so that when it's open, it engages right here. So because they can ignore that, they could kind of put a flipper tab wherever they want. From a user perspective, I mean, this is great. I really like this a lot. The few things that I just kind of like better in a liner lock, or at least a liner lock that's done well, is like this has a really nice detent, but I still think the ball detent in the liner lock is just a little crispier, and I like that. Like I'm sure with the right button post lock thing, you could design the detent to be a little bit crispier than this. This is really nice though. But I feel like this has a bit of lock stick in it, and maybe that could be improved just by the materials and, I don't know, the point of engagement. But like, this is just one of the things that I think about is like, if there's a lot of moving parts and there's a lot of range for motion, you generally get a little bit more friction in that mechanism. Like you can hear it. Whereas in a frame lock, for example, like one that's done really well doesn't really have like that like friction. It just kind of clicks on, clicks off, clicks on, clicks off. And that to me is really nice. And then the detent, of course. I just like a crispy detent. And then this is a cool one. This is one from a designer that I've been following for a long time. This is a superlock. It has kind of a interesting, almost like a slider bar back here, and then a bar that wedges in into a slot in the blade. And then it wedges up into that pin right there. So this is a really strong lock because it's kind of compressing everything in here. Everything's in double shear. It's not relying on one side. And the user experience with this is pretty interesting. It took me a little bit to get used to it at first, but it's pretty fun to play with. But kind of like with this, like the detent for me doesn't feel super snappy, like it, because of the way the detent is built into the ramp of the blade itself, and there's no ball detent. It kind of like falls into the closed position really fast, and then you can feel it kind of bouncing in there. And that's something I've noticed on this type of lock, on crossbar locks and stuff like that. It just bounces in the frame a little bit, and to me that it just doesn't feel as nice. That's just a preference thing though. And then as far as like the way it opens and closes, I like to be able to close a blade and still have my free index finger. And this, I guess you could do it, but it's not the most conducive. Like, sure, like you could, because there's no resistance or tension on the blade when you close it, you can easily operate with one hand. But for me, I just like having that free index finger. This is nice though because it's ambidextrous. And it's pretty novel. I think it's pretty cool. And then a couple of other ones are crossbar lock or axis lock. It's got a sliding bar in there that wedges up into the back of the blade. And again, it's in double shear. It's supported from both sides. It's not relying on any sort of like bar to bend into place or anything like that. Like these double shear types of locks are just, you can't get any stronger than that. There's a lot of different alternative designs where it's like different but not quite better. Like this is the point of diminishing return, where like once you get to this point as far as like a lock design where it's rigid, supportive from both sides of the knife, you can't really get better as far as like strength goes, in my opinion. This one's really nice because it's lightweight, light spring. I can operate the lock and still have a free finger. That doesn't go for all of them though. Like this one right here, much stronger spring, and I can't operate with that one hand. Like I could try to brace it from both sides, but then like I feel like I'm just gonna drop the knife and send it flying. I mean, I guess a little bit. I don't know. I think crossbar lock's pretty cool, but because same thing with like the other locks I was talking about, like because there's more movement in the lock assembly, there's more potential friction, and so I'm feeling like all of those sections where it's just rubbing up against each other, and then the detent where I feel the blade kind of like bouncing in the frame when it closes. It's not a very crisp snap. That's just, I don't know, that's just me. As far as like modern lock designs go, like these are all really nice. Crossbar, button, super lock, compression lock, which I don't have, which is kind of a liner lock on the backside, but it's wedging into the stop pin, so it's a lot stronger. They're all really, really cool, and I don't think you can get much better than them. You can get different, but not better. But I still love a good liner lock. I still love a good frame lock. Like, I don't know. It's an argument of like how strong do you really need it, and then like if you design a liner lock or a frame lock properly, I feel like that's plenty strong. And yes, when I'm closing it, I am getting my finger in the way, but it feels natural. Maybe that's because I'm just used to using it so much now. So when I first started filming, I didn't have a compression lock. I have one now, thank you to my patron Clockwork Fish for donating this for study purposes. This has been really interesting to use and study. So what is a compression lock? What's the difference between a compression lock and a liner lock? They both use basically a lock bar. The liner lock has the lock bar down here. Here is the 3D print file of this one. You can see there's a lock bar cut into the frame. The lock bar is in black. This is the liner lock, and it's got the lock bar right there. So the way these work is when I have the knife in the open position, and let's say I impart a closing force on this somehow, like I try to close the knife, it's putting a force back into the lock bar back here. And this does a really good job. I think if you make these properly, I think you'll probably never run into an issue with lock strength if it's done right. But it's theoretically not the strongest lock because you can be putting quite a bit of force into this long, narrow bar. And so what that can do is if I put a lot of force into this, it can bend this lock bar. So that is probably the main failure mode that people are concerned with liner locks is the lock bar buckling and being pushed out of the way and failing completely. A compression lock, it has a lock bar, but it works on a different principle. Instead of having the force be exerted into the long axis of the bar, now when you put a closing force on this blade, kind of similar to this one, that force is going kind of upward into here, and it uses a stop pin to wedge itself between there. Hence compression lock. That force is now squeezing it on the short axis instead of bending it on the long axis. It is theoretically a much stronger lock because of that. How strong is it compared to like an axis lock or that super lock or something like that? Well, it does wedge and work through compression on the short axis like this. They generally still have a thin lock bar in there, which can potentially twist. I mean, I can't imagine how you would ever encounter that, but it can potentially twist and maybe like slip off or something. I don't know. To me, that's not really an issue. The thing that I do like about compression locks, especially this one, this is a compression lock with a button on that lock bar. And it's similar to a button lock, but I find that I've been gravitating towards this a little bit more. So this button lock kind of has the similar ergonomics where it has that button right there. You press it to unlock it. I'm just going to call it a true button lock just to differentiate for now. The true button lock has a lock cylinder. My concern, I don't know how valid it is, but there's just a lot of surface area in contact with that cylinder. So this moves in and out concentric to that axis right there. And all around that cylinder, it's surface area that's basically interacting with that piston. And for me, at least for this one, like it has that kind of sticky, gritty lock feel. And then also like if I get like juice or something like up in there or like a piece of grit, like I feel like there's a good chance of that piston just not being able to fully engage. And that's just my concern right there. Whereas with a compression lock, it doesn't have a piston or anything like that. The contact points are this one point back here and then this one point right here. I feel a lot more comfortable with that. And it just feels... It just feels a little bit nicer to me. I don't know. So far, the design of this aside and stuff like that, like I've been enjoying the ergonomics and the function of this one. I don't really like where the button is, but that's kind of where the button has to go to fit this flipper tab and then the stop pin and the button all together. That is a design constraint that compression locks have to kind of overcome, rather than the button lock, which has a lot of freedom for design. Just because there's one main moving part, this is your lock and your detent all in one. And so you have a ton of room around the knife to do kind of almost whatever you want. But so far, functionality-wise, strength-wise, ergonomics, and the ambidextrous nature of this, I like a lot. Like, I can open this left-handed, unlock it, and still have my finger to close it. Same thing with this hand. Open it, unlock it with one finger, close it with the other finger. And that's not something that you really see a lot with a lot of these lock styles. I think I like the compression lock the most so far. Compression lock with a button. If it didn't have a button, I think it would be a little bit too awkward for me. I've handled a couple, and you have to put your finger into the backside here and then unlock it, which I guess maybe is better than a liner lock, because a liner lock, you have to put your finger in the path of the blade closing. And so this one, while it would be awkward without a button, at least it's not in the path of the blade. How would I do this? Yeah, I'd have to put my finger up in there and then try to close it. It'd be a little bit awkward. I don't know. I feel like I've rambled a lot about folding knives and locks. I don't really know what I'm talking about. I'm learning.